One of the most ironic things about The Last Airbender is that the main character, Aang, is constantly overshadowed by Zuko's character arc. Don't get me wrong, Aang is a decent character in every right, but Zuko is constantly rated far higher as a fan favorite.
Love me!
The most memorable scenes usually have Zuko in them. This sentiment is beautifully captured in the two final battles of the series, Aang vs. Ozai and Zuko vs. Azula. We all know, deep down inside, that Zuko vs. Azula is the superior final fight. But why? On the surface, the Aang vs. Ozai fight has all the right elements for a more epic final fight. We have Aang staring down the massive Fire Nation fleet. We have the most powerful benders going head to head. We see them flying around doing insane top-tier moves that we've never seen before. In the climax of the fight, Aang finally goes Kyoshi and moves literal mountains to defeat his enemy. We see him using a combination of all four elements to deliver the final blow. This has all the elements for a most epic showdown. But despite all this, it's just a good fight. Meanwhile, we have the more grounded fight between Azula and Zuko, and this one hits far harder despite being far less flashy. Why is that? Well, it all has to do with one rule: bigger does not equal better. One of the problems I see story writers do far too often is assume magnitude and scope is the primary ingredient for epic. This simply is not true. If you compare an epic scene to a cake, then the frosting and decoration is the flashy stuff. However, this doesn't mean the cake itself is amazing. It just helps make the cake look good and stand out initially. And so, just because a scene has a large army and large explosions doesn't mean it's nothing more than eye candy. It'll make it stand out, but only initially. This is in essence what happened in the Battle of the Five Armies. We had all the elements for something truly epic on the surface, but it was all just looks. The moment you sat down to watch it, you were almost immediately numb to everything happening despite the flashy action. If explosions plus action equaled epic, then movies like Transformers would constantly bring us to tears. But they don't. They're at best a teenager's visual drug.
They don't get it! They don't get it!
Let's look at Return of the King. In the third movie, we're set up with the awful scene of Gondor getting overwhelmed by the terrifying army of orcs. Then who shows up to save the day? Rohan. The scenes that play out after this make you weep not because of the size of the army, but because of what all this means. Gondor does not deserve Rohan's help, but here they are anyways. Rohan is coming to help the same people who have constantly failed them in their time of need.
Where was Gondor when the Westfold fell? Where was Gondor when our enemies closed in around us? Where was Gondor?
Not only has Gondor been a bad ally, but they are also facing down an immeasurable army, and defeat is all but guaranteed. So what does the king do facing down an immeasurable army for an ally that hasn't helped him? He rallies his troops, he inspires them, and despite all odds, they charge into a sea of black. This is the definition of epic, because there is an emotional impact. These men are charging in not because it's easy, but because it's the right thing to do. It's an incredible display of courage and sacrifice. There are three ways the writers try to make Aang's final fight epic. A good way to make a fight truly epic is where you have the hero going against impossible odds. It requires facing down a foe far more powerful than yourself. The writers were building up towards this type of final fight, but they accidentally undermined it all starting here.
Welcome home.
Disappointed!
You might ask, why would the scene ruin the build-up for the final fight? Because before this, all we saw was a shadow of an ominous figure, some sort of firebending monster ready to burn you to a crisp. We knew Aang was going to have to face down this monster, and we knew it was going to be an act of pure courage to do so. But by the end of Season 3, the writers accidentally nerfed Ozai. We see he isn't as scary as we thought, he's just kind of a creep. Not only did they make him a creep, but during the invasion of the Black Sun, he hides in his man cave and makes Azula keep the gang away for him. He's hiding from a bunch of kids. This does not bespeak of some terrifying threat, it bespeaks of a wimp. Could they have still made him an ominous threat? Yes, and they did try, to some success. They tried to build it all back up with Sozin's comment and showing him roasting the forest, but it's just not the same ominous threat we felt back from previous seasons. They needed to show him fighting an entire army by himself, taking on and beating multiple members of the White Lotus or something, and to establish that yes, he's kind of a creep, but he's still really powerful, and something that Aang should absolutely be terrified of, even in the Avatar state. The only time we see him fight is when he takes a cheap shot and it backfires on him.
Really?
Okay, so the fight can still be epic without it being so much about courage and more about an interesting dilemma. If you're looking for epic, make the character choose between two extremely tough decisions. The writers for Avatar tried to add more emotional stakes to the fight by either 1. Making Aang decide between killing Ozai, or 2. Sparing him at the risk of continual war but keeping his values. They built this dilemma up for a few episodes, but in a writing blunder, this is undermined when you remember that Monk Gyatso clearly killed multiple firebenders. The writers must have forgotten this detail, and it's kind of an important one. This scene clearly shows that it's not an issue for airbenders to kill in self-defense. And if Aang starts fighting Ozai and he has to kill him in self-defense, what's the big deal? Besides this obvious blunder, they proceed to toss the whole dilemma out the window when they give Aang turtle powers we've never heard of before. It's made for a beautiful animation, but it ruined the epic nature of what could have been an emotionally driven fight.
Where are the turtles? Where are they?
The last epic element the writers tried to add to the final fight was Aang unlocking his power. There's multiple ways to do this in writing, but the core principle is to make your hero dig deep to find more strength and power. The writers tried to do this with the Avatar state, but the problem is that it wasn't Aang's choice. It was a pure accident and sheer luck that he got his boo-boo fixed by smashing into an incredibly well-placed rock. There's nothing truly powerful about this because Aang doesn't have to dig in deep or give up something to unlock his power. When you unlock the hidden power, there needs to be an internal choice or drive the character makes to achieve that power. Now, we've gone over what they tried to do, but here are the 3 ways the writers could have made this final battle far more epic. Build up Ozai throughout the season to be a terrifying monstrosity and a worthy threat to the Avatar even when he's in the Avatar state. Show him destroying an entire army by himself without Sozin's comment. Show him beating the entire gang without firebending during the Black Sun. Show him taking down Bumi, Iroh, and the rest of the White Lotus by himself. Show him doing something, but build up Aang's terror and reluctance to fight Ozai. Then force him into it when he realizes that if he doesn't, Ozai is going to burn the whole world down. Make him a threat, and make it a true act of courage for Aang to face him down alone. Show how the whole time he's confident he can find a way to beat Ozai without going into the Avatar state, but after getting walloped and realizing that the world is more important than his attachments, he sacrifices his love for Katara to reach the Avatar state. Finally, give Aang the ability to energy bend, but it has to come at a serious cost. Make the cost of each possible decision clear to the viewer. If he lets Ozai live, the war continues. If he kills Ozai, he supposedly betrays his people's teachings. If he energy bends Ozai, it requires him to give up his own bending as well, or it requires his life. Any type of sacrifice to energy bend would have made this scene much more interesting by adding cost to not killing Ozai and using energy bending instead.
Almost perfect. One hair out of place.
Almost isn't good enough.
So why is Zuko versus Azula so good? This can be broken down into 2 main reasons. Zuko has always been in the shadow of Azula and he has never beat her before. He's definitely had more heart, but he's simply outdone by her natural talent. She's always had her father's affection, something he envied. By this point in the story though, Zuko has let go of all of his negative feelings. He's no longer trying to prove himself to his family. He's not trying to outdo his sister, he's just trying to do the right thing. By beating Azula, he will prove that he can surpass his limits when fighting for a higher cause. He proves he doesn't need the approval of others to find his worth. The element that really differentiates this fight from Aang's is when Zuko finally gains the upper hand against his sister. He's finally doing the impossible, and he's doing it for the right reason. Despite all this, he's willing to throw it all away. Zuko's journey started out selfish, but he ends it by being totally selfless. Without even thinking, he sacrifices himself to save his true love, his girlfriend, his friend.
I'm not my girlfriend.
Zuko sacrifices himself and he gives up the victory. Also, he could save Katara. This sacrificial act is the final nail in the coffin for his previous self. A past version of himself that was full of rage, loathing, and pride. Now, he has proven to himself, Katara, and Azula that he is indeed a good guy. The fight, compared to Ozai versus Aang, is small, but it's far more impactful. It still has some flashy scenes, but it's backed up by emotion. Bigger fights don't make them better. More explosions is not the key ingredient to epic. The world does not need to end in order to make your scene feel powerful. Small, simple acts, if framed right, could be far more powerful than lifting a sword. It's not the size of the scene that makes it epic, it's what's at stake. It's the culmination of previous choices and their consequences. An epic scene takes a character's defining quality and magnifies it. So just remember, bigger does not mean better.